The morning sun filtered through my kitchen windows as I sat at the breakfast table, staring at the legal documents scattered before me. The papers seemed to mock me with their official letterhead and cold, impersonal language about asset division and property rights. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the latest filing from my ex-husband's attorney, demanding half the value of what had been our family home for 23 years. You're about to hear an unbelievable true story, so please like and subscribe. Drop your location in the comments. My name is Rebecca Ford, I'm 49 years old, and I never imagined I'd be fighting tooth and nail to keep the roof over my head. This house isn't just 4 walls and a mortgage to me. It's where I raised my children, where I planted the garden that still blooms every spring, where I've poured my heart and savings into every renovation and repair. The thought of losing it felt like losing a piece of my soul. I'd been relying heavily on my friend Sharon Mills during these difficult months. Sharon had been my closest confidant for over 15 years, ever since our kids played soccer together. She'd sit right here at this very table, drinking coffee and listening to me vent about the divorce proceedings, offering tissues when I cried and reassurance when I felt overwhelmed. She knew every detail of my financial situation, every strategy my lawyer suggested, every fear that kept me awake at night. My daughter, Emma Ford, had been my rock throughout this entire ordeal. At 25, she'd moved back home temporarily to help me navigate the emotional and practical challenges of starting over. Emma worked as a paralegal downtown, and her legal knowledge had been invaluable in helping me understand the complex paperwork that seemed to multiply on my dining room table each week. Then, there was my neighbor, Patricia Chen, a retired real estate agent who lived just 3 houses down. Patricia had become an unexpected source of support, often stopping by with homemade soup or offering to help with yard work when the stress became too much. Her experience in property matters had given me hope that I could find a way to keep my home. This particular morning felt different, though. There was a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with the usual divorce anxiety. Something about the latest legal maneuver from my ex-husband's side felt too calculated, too informed. The filing referenced specific improvements I'd made to the house, details about my financial situation that weren't part of any public record. I heard Emma's footsteps on the stairs as she came down for breakfast, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself 3 summers ago. She appeared in the doorway wearing her professional navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that made her look older than her years. "Mom, you're up early again," she said, concern evident in her voice as she noticed the papers spread across the table. "Did another filing come in?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice for a moment. The weight of potentially losing everything felt heavier in the morning light. "They're asking for things they shouldn't even know about, Emma. Details about the basement renovation, the exact amount I spent on the new furnace last year, even information about the small business loan I took out to start my consulting practice." Emma poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me, her trained eye scanning the legal documents. Her expression grew more serious as she read, and I could see the wheels turning in her analytical mind. "This is very specific information, Mom. Almost like someone's been feeding them details about your personal finances and home improvements." She looked up at me with troubled eyes. "Who else knows all of this?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. I'd been so careful about who I confided in, so selective about sharing the intimate details of my divorce proceedings. The circle of people who knew everything was incredibly small. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sharon, asking if I wanted to meet for our usual Wednesday coffee. The timing felt oddly coincidental, considering what Emma had just pointed out about the suspicious specificity of the legal filing. As I stared at Sharon's message, a cold realization began to creep into my consciousness. She'd been asking a lot of detailed questions lately, questions I'd attributed to caring concern, but now seemed potentially calculating. Just last week, she'd wanted to know the exact square footage of my house, claiming she was curious for her own property tax assessment. One small detail blew the whole thing open. That afternoon, after Emma left for work, I found myself drawn to my home office where I kept important documents. Something about the morning's revelation nagged at me, and I needed to understand how my ex-husband's legal team had obtained such specific information. I pulled out my filing cabinet and began going through folders, looking for any pattern that might explain the leak. Credit card statements, contractor receipts, bank records, all the mundane paperwork that documented the improvements I'd made to turn this house into a real home after 23 years of marriage. As I spread the documents across my desk, my phone rang. It was Sharon. "Hey, I saw you never responded to my text about coffee," she said, her voice carrying that familiar warm tone that had comforted me through so many difficult conversations over the past year. "Are you okay? You've seemed a little distant lately." I hesitated, Emma's words from this morning echoing in my mind. "I'm just dealing with some new complications in the divorce. David's lawyers seem to know things they shouldn't know." "What kind of things?" Sharon asked quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Details about my finances, the work I've done on the house, very specific amounts and dates." I watched my reflection in the computer screen as I spoke, studying my own expression for signs of paranoia. "That's terrible," Sharon said. "Maybe they hired a private investigator? I've heard that's common in contentious divorces." The suggestion felt reasonable, but something in her tone bothered me. There was an edge there, a careful quality that made me think she was choosing her words deliberately. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone in my hand. Sharon had been my closest friend through this entire ordeal, the one person I'd trusted with every detail of my crumbling marriage and the financial aftermath. She'd listened patiently as I vented about David's attempts to claim half the value of improvements I'd made with my own money and labor. I thought back to our conversations over the past few months, how she'd asked about the basement renovation timeline, claiming she was considering similar work. Her curiosity about my business loan, which she'd said might inspire her own entrepreneurial plans. The way she'd wanted to know exact figures when I mentioned the new furnace, saying she needed to budget for her own aging system. At the time, her questions had seemed like the natural interest of a close friend. Now, they felt different. That evening, Emma came home to find me still surrounded by paperwork in the office. "Mom, you've been in here for hours," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "What did you find?" "Maybe nothing, maybe everything." I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. "I keep thinking about what you said this morning, about someone feeding information to David's team." Emma leaned forward. "And?" "Sharon has asked me about every single thing mentioned in today's filing. Not all at once, but over the past several months. Each question seemed innocent at the time. The words felt heavy as I spoke them, like I was betraying not just Sharon, but my own judgment. How could I have been so naive? How could I not have seen what now seemed obvious? Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. "That could be coincidence, Mom. Sharon's been your friend for years. She was the one who helped you move David's stuff out. She brought you dinner every night that first week." "I know. That's what makes this so hard to accept." I gestured at the papers scattered across my desk. "But the timing, Emma, the specificity, it all lines up too perfectly." My daughter studied the documents, her analytical mind working through the evidence I'd laid out. "We need to be sure before you accuse her of anything. This would destroy your friendship if you're wrong." She was right, of course. But as I looked at the pattern emerging from months of seemingly casual conversations, I felt sick to my stomach. The betrayal would be devastating if true, but the uncertainty was almost worse. "There's one way to find out," Emma said quietly, meeting my eyes. "But you're not going to like it." The weight of her implication settled over me like a cold blanket. To catch Sharon in the act would require setting a trap, turning our friendship into a test that she might not even know she was taking. As I sat there in my office, surrounded by evidence of either coincidence or calculated betrayal, I realized that tomorrow's conversation with Sharon would determine whether I still had any friends left in this world, or whether David had managed to corrupt even that relationship in his quest to take everything I'd built. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Emma's words echoing in my mind. The trap she'd suggested was simple in concept, but agonizing in practice. Give Sharon false information and see if it appeared in David's next filing. The thought made my stomach churn. 23 years of friendship, and I was considering treating Sharon like a suspect. But the alternative was continuing to hemorrhage money and advantages to David's legal team while pretending everything was normal. By morning, I'd made my decision. Emma found me in the kitchen at 6 a.m., already dressed and nursing my second cup of coffee. "You look terrible, Mom." "Thanks for the honesty." I managed a weak smile. "I've been thinking about what you said, about testing Sharon." Emma poured herself coffee and sat across from me at the breakfast table. "And I'm going to do it, but I need to make it believable, something David would actually want to pursue." I pulled out a notebook where I'd been sketching ideas in the pre-dawn darkness. What if I told her I'd been hiding money? Something significant enough that David's lawyers would jump on it immediately. That could backfire if she's innocent. She might worry about you lying to the court. I'd thought of that too. Then I'll know she's really my friend, won't I? She'll confront me about it, ask questions, maybe even tell me I'm being stupid. Emma studied my face, seeing the exhaustion and pain I couldn't hide. "This is eating you alive." "The not knowing is worse than the possibility of betrayal." I closed the notebook, decision crystallized. If Sharon is feeding information to David, I need to know now, before I lose everything. And if she's not... I paused, considering the relief that outcome would bring. Then I'll have my friend back, and I can focus on figuring out where the leak really is. The plan I'd developed was straightforward. I would tell Sharon that I'd found an old investment account David didn't know about, something I'd opened years ago with money from freelance work. I'd say I was worried about whether I had to disclose it, make it seem like I was conflicted about the ethics, but ultimately decided to keep quiet. If Sharon was innocent, she'd either advise me to disclose it or at least express concern about the legal implications. If she was working with David, the information would show up in his lawyer's discovery requests within days. Emma finished her coffee and gathered her things for work. "When are you going to tell her?" "Today. She usually calls around lunchtime to check on me." The routine that had once comforted me now felt calculated, another piece of evidence in the case I was building against my closest friend. "Mom, promise me something. If this proves she's been betraying you, don't confront her alone. Wait until I get home." I nodded, though part of me wasn't sure I could contain the rage and hurt if my suspicions proved correct. The idea of Sharon sitting in my kitchen, accepting my coffee and my trust, while secretly working to destroy me, made my hands shake. After Emma left, I tried to distract myself with household tasks, but everything reminded me of conversations with Sharon. The new curtains I'd hung last month, which she'd complimented while asking detailed questions about the cost. The garden renovation I'd mentioned, which she'd wanted to know all about for her own landscaping plans. When the phone rang at 12:30, Sharon's name on the caller ID made my heart race. "How are you holding up after yesterday?" she asked, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine concern. "It's been rough. David's team seems to know everything about our finances, even things I thought were private." I took a deep breath, hating myself for what I was about to do. "Sharon, can I ask you something? Hypothetically?" "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" This was it. The moment that would either restore my faith in our friendship or shatter it completely. I closed my eyes and delivered the lie that would determine whether I still had anyone left to trust in this nightmare my life had become. Let's say someone had an old investment account that their spouse didn't know about. Something small, maybe $5,000, opened years ago with freelance money. Would they have to disclose that in a divorce? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Sharon finally responded, her voice had shifted to something more careful, more measured. "Well, legally speaking, all assets acquired during the marriage need to be disclosed. But $5,000 isn't exactly life-changing money." She paused, and I could almost hear her thinking. Is this hypothetical, or are we talking about something real here? My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't the Sharon who usually lectured me about being too honest for my own good, who'd spent months telling me to fight harder for what was mine. This Sharon sounded almost eager. "It's real," I admitted, letting my voice carry the weight of fake guilt. "I opened it 3 years ago when I was doing those marketing projects for the dental offices. I kept meaning to tell David about it, but then things got so bad between us, and now—" "Where is it? What kind of account?" The question came too quickly, too sharp. The Sharon I knew would have asked how I was feeling about it, whether I was okay with keeping secrets. She wouldn't have immediately wanted the practical details. "It's at First National, just a savings account earning practically nothing." I forced myself to sound conflicted. I know I should probably disclose it, but his lawyers already seem to know about every penny we have. Sometimes I feel like they know more about our finances than I do. "You said 5,000? "About that. Maybe a little more with interest." Another pause. Then Sharon's voice returned to its usual warmth, but I could hear the performance in it now. "Honey, I think you're overthinking this. If it's money you earned independently and kept separate, you might not need to make a big deal about it. Sometimes in these situations, you have to protect yourself." The words landed like physical blows. This was Sharon telling me to hide assets, Sharon encouraging me to break the law. The same Sharon who'd insisted I was being too trusting, who'd pushed me to be more suspicious of David's motives. "You really think so?" "I think you need to look out for yourself. David clearly isn't playing fair, so why should you tie one hand behind your back?" After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone, feeling like I'd just watched a stranger wearing my best friend's face. Emma's test had worked too well. Not only had Sharon failed to advise honesty, she'd actively encouraged deception. I thought about all the time she'd sat in this same chair, listening to me worry about the divorce proceedings, offering comfort and advice. How many of those conversations had she reported back to David? How many of my fears and strategies had she passed along? The front door opened, and Emma called out, "Mom, I'm home early. The afternoon class got canceled." "In here," I managed, my voice sounding hollow even to me. Emma appeared in the doorway, took one look at my face, and dropped her backpack. "She failed the test, didn't she?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. Emma pulled out the chair across from me, the same chair Sharon had occupied so many times over the past months. "Tell me exactly what she said." As I recounted the conversation, Emma's expression grew darker. When I finished, she leaned back and shook her head. Mom, she didn't just fail the test. She encouraged you to commit fraud. That's not someone who's just passing along gossip to David. That's someone actively working against you. The truth of it hit me like ice water. She wanted details about the account, the bank, the type, the amount. She was gathering information. And now she'll report back to David that you're hiding assets, probably with enough detail to make it sound credible. Emma drummed her fingers on the table. The question is, what do we do about it? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Sharon. Been thinking about our conversation. Maybe we should meet for coffee tomorrow and talk more about your options. I showed Emma the message. She read it and her jaw tightened. She's not done yet. She's going to try to get more information, probably wants to know if there are other accounts. Emma looked up at me with an expression far too mature for her 22 years. Mom, I think Sharon's been working with David from the beginning, and I think tomorrow she's going to try to get you to confess to hiding money that doesn't even exist. I stared at Sharon's text message, my hands trembling slightly. The casual tone, the suggestion of coffee and conversation. It all felt so normal, so much like the Sharon I thought I knew. But now, every word seemed calculated. I can't believe this is happening, I whispered, setting the phone down on the table. 23 years of friendship, Emma, since before you were born. She was at the hospital when you came into this world. Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I know, Mom. I remember all those Saturday mornings when Sharon would come over with bagels and we'd sit around in our pajamas. She taught me how to braid my hair for gymnastics meets. The memories felt like physical pain now. Sharon helping me paint Emma's nursery. Sharon bringing casseroles when I had the flu. Sharon celebrating with champagne when I got my promotion at work. All of it now tainted with the possibility of betrayal. What if we're wrong? I asked, though even as I said it, I knew we weren't. What if she just gave bad advice? Emma pulled out her laptop and opened it on the kitchen table. Mom, let's think about this logically. Sharon's advice today wasn't just bad, it was specifically designed to get you in trouble, and she wanted exact details about a bank account that doesn't exist. She was right, and I knew it. But accepting it meant accepting that someone I'd trusted completely had been working against me for months. Look, Emma continued, when did Sharon first start giving you advice about being more suspicious of David? When did she start pushing you to hide things? I thought back through the conversations, trying to remember. It was right after David and I separated. Maybe 3 months ago? She kept saying I was being too naive, that I needed to protect myself better. And what did you tell her when she said that? I told her David's lawyer was already aggressive enough, that I didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. I said I just wanted a fair split of our assets. I paused, the implications becoming clearer. She kept pushing me to be more secretive, more defensive. Emma nodded grimly. She was trying to get you to actually hide assets, or at least act like you were hiding them. And when you wouldn't take the bait naturally, she had to try a direct approach. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sharon. Also, don't worry about our earlier conversation. These things stay between friends. I showed Emma the message, and she let out a bitter laugh. She's covering her tracks, making sure you know this is private, so when David's lawyer brings up your supposed secret account, you'll be completely blindsided. The reality of it was sinking in, making me feel sick. She's been playing both sides this entire time, comforting me while feeding information to David. Worse than that, Mom, she's been actively trying to sabotage you. This isn't just about passing along gossip. This is about setting you up, I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden where Sharon and I had spent so many afternoons planning flower beds and talking about our dreams for retirement. The roses we'd planted together last spring were blooming now, their pink petals bright against the green leaves. I keep thinking about all the things I told her, I said quietly. About how worried I was about keeping the house, about my concerns with David's lawyer, about how scared I was of ending up with nothing. Emma joined me at the window. She used all of that against you. Every fear you shared, every worry, she turned it into a weapon for David. The weight of the betrayal was overwhelming. It wasn't just losing a friend, it was realizing that my friend had never really existed. The Sharon who had comforted me through my darkest moments was the same person who had been orchestrating some of those dark moments. "What do I do about tomorrow?" I asked. "She wants to meet for coffee." Emma was quiet for a moment, then turned to face me with a look of determination. "You're going to meet her, but this time, we're going to be the ones setting the trap." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's time to find out exactly how deep this goes. We need to know what David knows, what Sharon has told him, and what they're planning next." Emma's voice was steady, but I could see the anger burning in her eyes. "Sharon wants to play games with our family? Fine, but she's about to learn that she picked the wrong people to mess with." The determination in my daughter's voice both scared and comforted me. We were moving into uncharted territory now, and I wasn't sure what we might discover about the people we thought we knew. That evening, I couldn't sleep. Every conversation I'd had with Sharon over the past 6 months kept replaying in my mind. But now, with this horrible new context, the way she'd always steered our talks back to my finances, how she'd insisted on knowing details about my lawyer's strategy, the pointed questions about whether I'd hidden any assets from David. I found myself in the kitchen at 2 a.m, making tea I didn't really want, just needing something to do with my hands. The house felt different now, knowing that someone had been systematically trying to take it from me. Every corner held memories of conversations with Sharon, planning and dreaming about the future I was fighting so hard to protect. Emma found me there at dawn, still in my robe, staring out at the garden. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Not really." I wrapped my hands around the cold mug of forgotten tea. "I keep thinking about what you said, about setting a trap for Sharon. I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of deception." Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mom, what Sharon has been doing to you isn't friendship. It's manipulation. There's nothing wrong with protecting yourself from someone who's been lying to you for months." The coffee date with Sharon was in 4 hours. My stomach churned at the thought of sitting across from her, pretending everything was normal while knowing what I now knew. "What exactly are you thinking I should do?" I asked. Emma leaned forward, her expression serious. "We need to find out what David's next move is. Sharon obviously knows, or she wouldn't have been pushing so hard about that secret account yesterday. If we can get her to reveal what they're planning, we can prepare for it." "But how?" "I'm not good at this kind of thing, Emma. I can't just sit there and lie to her face." "You don't have to lie. You just have to listen. Really listen to what she says and how she says it." Emma paused, thinking. "Maybe mention that you're worried about the next court date. See if she tries to fish for more information, or if she lets something slip about what David might bring up." The thought of another court appearance made my chest tight. What if they really do have something on me? What if David found some way to make it look like I've been hiding money? "Then we'll deal with it. But Mom, You've been completely honest throughout this whole process. Your lawyer has all your financial records. There's nothing to hide because you haven't hidden anything. I knew Emma was right, but the fear lingered. David had always been clever with details, and if Sharon had been feeding him information about my concerns and strategies, who knew what kind of case they might be building? My phone buzzed with a text from Sharon. Looking forward to coffee today. I have some things I want to talk to you about. Emma read it over my shoulder. See? She's not just meeting for casual conversation. She has an agenda. The certainty in my daughter's voice helped steady my nerves. Emma had always been good at reading people, better than I was. If she thought Sharon was working against me, then I needed to trust that judgment even when it broke my heart. Okay, I said finally. I'll meet with her, but I want you to know where I am, just in case. Actually, Emma said, a new thought crossing her face. What if I came with you? I blinked in surprise. To the coffee shop? Not to sit with you, but nearby. Sharon doesn't know I'm in town, right? I could be at another table, close enough to observe, but not close enough for her to notice me. Emma's eyes lit up with the idea. Sometimes people reveal more through their body language than their words. I could watch how she reacts to your responses. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Having Emma nearby would be comforting, but it also made the whole thing feel more serious, more dangerous somehow. What if she sees you? Then I'm just your daughter getting coffee. But I don't think she will. Sharon will be too focused on whatever information she's trying to get from you. I stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at those roses Sharon and I had planted together. In a few hours, I'd be sitting across from her, knowing that every moment of our friendship might have been calculated. The woman who had held my hand while I cried about David's betrayal had been betraying me herself. There's something else, I said quietly, not turning around. What if I'm wrong? What if there's some explanation for all this that I'm not seeing? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Mom, you've always given people the benefit of the doubt. It's one of the things I love most about you. But sometimes people don't deserve that benefit. I turned to face her, seeing my own hurt reflected in her eyes. Sharon texted you right after trying to manipulate information out of you, Emma continued. She specifically mentioned keeping things between friends to make sure you wouldn't mention the conversation to anyone else. That's not the behavior of someone who has innocent intentions. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. Okay, we'll do it. But Emma, what if we find out it's even worse than we thought? My daughter's expression grew determined. Then at least we'll know what we're really dealing with. I spent the rest of the morning rehearsing what I might say to Sharon, running through scenarios in my head until they all blurred together. Every possible conversation felt like walking through a minefield. How do you talk to someone who's been lying to you when you can't let them know you've discovered their deception? Emma watched me pace around the kitchen, occasionally offering suggestions, but mostly just letting me work through my anxiety. Around noon, she finally said, Mom, you're going to wear a hole in the floor. I just keep thinking about all the times she comforted me, I said, stopping by the counter. When David first moved out, Sharon brought me soup and sat with me while I cried. She listened to me vent about how unfair everything was. And the whole time, was she just gathering information to report back to him? The thought made my stomach churn. I'd been so grateful for her friendship during those dark, early days of the separation. Sharon had been my lifeline when everything felt like it was falling apart. Emma came over and put her hand on my arm. Maybe that's exactly why this hurts so much. It's not just about the house or the divorce proceedings. She violated something sacred. I nodded, feeling tears threaten again. Your friendships are supposed to be the safe harbor when your marriage falls apart. When Sharon betrays that trust, it makes me question everything. Who else might be working against me? How long has this been going on? Don't spiral into that, Emma said firmly. We know about Sharon now. That's what matters. We can deal with what we know. At 12:30, I finally forced myself to get ready. I chose my clothes carefully, not wanting to appear too dressed up or too casual. Everything felt significant now, like Sharon would be analyzing my appearance for clues about my financial situation or emotional state. Emma and I drove separately to the coffee shop, a little place called Morning Brew that Sharon and I had visited dozens of times over the years. As I pulled into the parking lot, memories flooded back of all our previous conversations there. Planning Emma's graduation party, discussing our book club selections, complaining about our husband's annoying habits. Had any of it been genuine? I sat in my car for a moment, watching through the windows as Emma entered the shop and selected a table near the back corner. She'd brought a book and her laptop, looking like any other customer settling in for an afternoon of work. My phone buzzed with a text from Sharon. Just got here, got us a table by the window. Of course she had. The window table was the most visible spot in the place, where anyone passing by could see us having what looked like a normal, friendly conversation. It would reinforce the image that Sharon was still my trusted confidant. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Sharon waved enthusiastically from across the room, her smile as warm and familiar as ever. She looked exactly like the friend who had stood by me through every crisis of the past decade. Nothing in her appearance suggested deception or betrayal. Margaret, she called out, standing to give me a hug. You look wonderful. How are you holding up? The embrace felt like a lie against my skin, but I managed to return it without flinching. I'm doing okay. Some days are better than others, you know? Of course, honey. This whole process is just awful. Sharon's voice carried that same sympathetic tone she'd used countless times before. I ordered you a vanilla latte, your usual. Even her knowledge of my coffee preference felt manipulative now. How many small details about my life had she been cataloging to use against me? We settled into our seats, and Sharon leaned forward with concern etched across her features. I've been so worried about you since we talked yesterday. You seemed really stressed about the financial side of things. There it was. Less than 2 minutes into our conversation, and she was already probing about my finances. I glanced quickly toward Emma's table and saw her looking up from her book, though she appeared to be gazing out the window rather than at us. It's complicated, I said carefully. There are just so many factors to consider. I can imagine. David always handled most of the financial decisions in your marriage, didn't he? Sharon's tone remained gentle, but I could hear the fishing expedition beginning. My chest tightened. David and I had made financial decisions together, but Sharon was framing it as if I'd been completely dependent on him. Was this narrative she was helping him build? The helpless wife who couldn't manage money on her own? We made decisions together, I corrected, trying to keep my voice level. Of course, Sharon said quickly. I just meant that divorce finances can be so overwhelming. Have you been able to get good advice about the house situation? The house situation. Not my house, or your house, but the house situation. As if my home of 15 years was just a problem to be solved, rather than the place where I'd raised my daughter and built my life. I felt a flash of anger that I had to work hard to suppress. I'm working through all the options, I said, taking a sip of the latte she'd ordered for me. It tasted bitter today, though I wasn't sure if that was the coffee or my mood. Sharon nodded sympathetically. I just hate seeing you go through this alone. You know, I was thinking about what you said yesterday about maybe having to sell the house. She paused, stirring her own drink slowly. Have you considered that it might actually be a blessing in disguise? A blessing in disguise. My stomach clenched as I recognized the language David had used just weeks ago during one of our heated discussions about the property division. He'd said those exact words, suggesting that losing the house would free me from the burden of maintenance and mortgage payments. How do you mean? I asked, though I suspected I already knew where this was headed. Well, you've always talked about how much work the house needs. The roof, the furnace that's been acting up, those foundation issues you mentioned last year. Sharon's voice remained gentle, caring even, but each word felt like a small betrayal. Maybe this is your chance for a fresh start somewhere more manageable. The foundation issues. I'd confided in Sharon about those concerns after a particularly stressful contractor visit 8 months ago. At the time, she'd been so supportive, even offering to help me research repair companies. Now I realized she'd probably reported every detail back to David, giving him ammunition to argue that the house was more liability than asset. I love that house, I said quietly. It's where I raised Emma. I know, sweetie, I know. But Emma's grown now, and maybe it's time to think about what's practical for your future. Sharon reached across the table to pat my hand. You're going to be managing everything on your own now. Wouldn't it be easier to have something smaller, newer, with fewer headaches? The patronizing tone was unmistakable now that I was listening for it. She was speaking to me like I was a child who needed to be convinced to give up a toy that was too advanced for me. The implication was clear. I wasn't capable of maintaining the home I'd been living in and caring for perfectly well for 15 years. I caught another glimpse of Emma at her corner table. She had her phone out now, and I wondered if she was recording this conversation as we'd discussed. The thought gave me strength. The house has been manageable so far, I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the anger building inside me. But that was with David's income too, Sharon pressed gently. I'm just worried about you taking on too much financial stress. You've been through enough already. There it was again, the suggestion that I was financially helpless without my ex-husband. I thought about all the times Sharon had praised my business sense, my careful budgeting, my ability to stretch our household income during David's leaner years early in his career. Had those compliments been lies too? Or had her opinion of me conveniently changed when it served David's purposes? I've been thinking about downsizing anyway. I lied smoothly, watching Sharon's face carefully. Her eyes lit up with what looked like genuine enthusiasm. But now I wondered if it was excitement about my supposed willingness to cooperate with whatever plan she and David had cooked up. Really? That's wonderful, Margaret. I think that shows such wisdom and strength. She squeezed my hand again. Have you thought about what kind of place you'd want? Maybe something in that new complex downtown? The condos there are supposed to be very nice, and you wouldn't have to worry about yard work or maintenance. The new complex downtown. The same place David had suggested during our last mediation session, claiming it would be perfect for my new lifestyle as a single woman. I felt sick realizing that he and Sharon had probably discussed this recommendation in detail. Those are pretty small units, though, I said, testing her response. But perfect for one person, Sharon said quickly. And think of how much simpler your life would be. No more worrying about gutters or landscaping or any of those tedious homeowner responsibilities. I'd always loved gardening, took pride in my flower beds, enjoyed the satisfaction of maintaining my property. Sharon knew this about me. She'd complimented my garden countless times, had even asked for advice about her own landscaping projects. Now, she was dismissing activities she knew I enjoyed as tedious burdens I'd be better off without. The depth of the manipulation was staggering. This wasn't just about gathering information for David. Sharon was actively trying to convince me that losing my house would be good for me, that I should want to give it up. I forced myself to nod and smile, playing along with her vision of my diminished future. You might be right about the maintenance being easier. Sharon beamed at me like I was a prize student who'd finally grasped a difficult concept. Exactly. And think about it, Margaret. When was the last time you really used that formal dining room? Or the guest bedroom upstairs? You're rattling around in all that space. I wasn't rattling around anywhere. I used every room in my house regularly. The dining room hosted my book club meetings twice a month. The guest bedroom was where my mother stayed during her visits, where I spread out my freelance graphic design projects when I needed more workspace. Sharon had attended book club meetings in that dining room. She'd helped me set up my computer equipment in the guest room just last month. But according to her new narrative, I was a lonely woman, lost in too much house, desperately in need of downsizing to find happiness. I suppose you're right, I said carefully, though I do worry about storage space in a smaller place. Oh, storage! Sharon waved her hand dismissively. That's just an excuse to hold on to things you don't really need. A move like this could be liberating, Margaret. A chance to really start fresh. Start fresh. Another phrase David had used repeatedly in mediation, always in the context of why I should let go of material possessions and not cling to the past. I wondered if Sharon had helped him practice these talking points, or if she'd been the one to suggest them in the first place. You sound like you've given this a lot of thought, I said, letting just a hint of curiosity creep into my voice. For a split second, Sharon looked almost guilty. Then she recovered with another warm smile. I've just been so worried about you, honey. I lie awake at night thinking about how to help you get through this transition in the healthiest way possible. The word transition stung. Not divorce, not difficult time, but transition, as if my marriage ending was just a natural life phase I needed to accept gracefully, rather than a devastating betrayal that had turned my world upside down. Have you talked to David about any of this? I asked, watching her reaction carefully. Sharon's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. David? Well, I mean, we've run into each other a few times since you separated. Small town, you know. Small town. We lived in a city of 200,000 people. The chances of casually running into someone multiple times were slim unless you were making an effort. I'm sure that must be awkward for you, I said sympathetically, being friends with both of us. It really is, Sharon said, and for the first time that afternoon, her emotions seemed genuine. I hate being put in the middle of this, Margaret. I care about both of you. There it was. The admission that there was a middle to be in, that she was actively maintaining relationships with both sides of this divorce. Most friends picked a side, or at least had the decency to step back from the situation entirely. Sharon had apparently chosen to stay involved with both of us, while pretending to each that her loyalty lay with them alone. What does David say when you see him? I asked, keeping my tone light and gossipy rather than accusatory. Sharon shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Oh, you know David. He's always been proud. He tries to act like everything's fine, but I can tell he's struggling too. That was interesting. She was painting David as vulnerable, perhaps to make me feel guilty about fighting for the house. But I knew David better than that. When he was truly struggling, he became cold and calculating, not proud and stoic. If he was confiding his struggles to Sharon, it was for strategic purposes, not emotional support. Does he ask about me? The question slipped out before I could stop myself, and I immediately regretted showing even that small vulnerability. Sharon's expression softened with what looked like pity. He does, Margaret. He's worried about you too, especially about your financial situation after everything is settled. My financial situation. There it was again, the suggestion that I was heading for poverty without David's support. I thought about my bank account, my growing freelance client list, the careful budget I'd prepared, showing exactly how I could afford the house payments on my own. None of that seemed to matter to anyone except me. I'm managing better than people think, I said quietly. But are you really, though? Sharon leaned forward intently. I mean, really honestly, Margaret? Because there's no shame in admitting that this is harder than you expected. No one would think less of you for accepting help or making practical choices. Practical choices. Another euphemism for giving David what he wanted. The kitchen timer I'd set earlier began beeping, and I jumped up gratefully for the interruption. That's the cookies, I said, though I hadn't actually been baking anything. I'd set the timer as an exit strategy, just in case this conversation went badly. As I moved toward the kitchen, I heard Sharon's phone buzz with a text message. Through the doorway, I watched her read it quickly, then glanced toward the kitchen with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. It was calculation, pure and simple. Whatever that text said, it had something to do with me. I pretended to busy myself in the kitchen, turning off the fake timer and actually pulling out some crackers to arrange on a plate. But my attention was focused entirely on Sharon in the other room. I could hear her typing a response to whoever had texted her. The timing felt too convenient. Here we were, having this conversation about my financial situation and David's concerns. And suddenly, she gets a message that makes her look at me like I'm some kind of chess piece to be moved around the board. When I returned to the living room with the crackers, Sharon had put her phone away, but something had shifted in her demeanor. She seemed more focused, more purposeful. Margaret, I've been thinking about what you said, about managing better than people think, she began, settling back into her chair. Maybe there's a way to prove that to everyone, including David's lawyer. I set the plate down carefully, buying myself time to process this new direction. What do you mean? Well, if you're really committed to keeping the house, you'll need to show concrete evidence that you can handle all the expenses long-term. Not just the mortgage, but maintenance, taxes, insurance, utilities. Everything David has been covering. This felt like a test, though I wasn't sure what I was being tested for. I have spreadsheets, I said. Budget projections, income statements from my freelance work. Sharon nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You should share those with me. I mean, if you trust my judgment, I could review them and maybe even mention to David how well prepared you are. Sometimes hearing it from a neutral third party carries more weight. Neutral third party. The phrase made my stomach clench. Sharon was many things, but neutral wasn't one of them. Nobody could be truly neutral in a situation like this, no matter how much they pretended otherwise. I appreciate the offer, I said slowly, but I'm not sure I'm ready to share those details yet. They're still pretty rough. The disappointment that flashed across Sharon's face was brief, but unmistakable. Of course I understand. It's just that time might be a factor here. These things move faster than people expect. Another nudge toward urgency. I was starting to recognize the pattern now. Every conversation with Sharon lately seemed to include some element of time pressure, some suggestion that I needed to act quickly or risk losing everything. My phone, sitting on the coffee table between us, suddenly buzzed with a text. I glanced at it and felt my blood run cold. It was from David. Hope Sharon's visit is going well. Let me know what you decide about the house. I stared at the message, reading it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining things. David knew Sharon was here. Not only knew, but was apparently expecting some kind of decision from me afterward. Sharon was watching my face carefully. Everything okay? I turned my phone face down without responding to David's text. Sharon, how long have you and David been discussing my situation? The question hung in the air between us. Sharon's carefully maintained expression of concerned friendship wavered for just a moment, and in that moment, I saw the truth. We're not discussing your situation, she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. We're both just worried about you. He knew you were coming here today. It wasn't a question. Sharon looked down at her hands. Margaret, this isn't what you think it is. Then what is it, exactly? The silence stretched between us. Outside, I could hear children playing in the yard next door, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension filling my living room. This house, these sounds, this life I'd built, it all felt so fragile suddenly. David asked me to talk to you, Sharon finally admitted. But not for the reasons you're imagining.